Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Tuesday, July 11th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Indiana game is in 53 days. The game against Michigan in 137 days. This show always goes up a little early. That's the joke. It's Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning, so it goes up the night before. People are constantly confused about this in the YouTube comments. I'm going to be honest, this one's probably going to go up a little earlier than a typical show does, because by the time we're done talking about this, who knows, the whole story may have changed again, but we do need to talk about the Pat Fitzgerald Northwestern hazing investigation scandal, crazy counter reports back and forth, depending on which side of the story you want to believe. What does it mean for Northwestern? What does it mean for Pat Fitzgerald? It is a crazy, crazy story. We are, if you have been blessed enough to not be, following every ping pong back and forth, as this story kind of goes along, we are going to do our best to kind of give you the Cliff Notes version, what it might mean for Northwestern and that football program, which has been led by Pat Fitzgerald for a very, very long time and might not be for very much longer. Hence, we're probably going to get this up a little early, just in case some news breaks between the time we record and the time this posts. All right, so let's bring in our buddy Tony Gerdeman of BuckeyeHuddle.com. We are going to do our very best to make this, we're not going to get too deep into the weeds because, some of the allegations are not stuff you're going to want to be listening to in the car with your kids. But Tony, let's, I guess, start with just where this all began. Last Friday, the classic summer Friday afternoon news dump. Pat Fitzgerald suspended 2 weeks unpaid after an investigation found evidence of hazing in the program. My immediate reaction when this happened was, okay, so hazing happened. Pat Fitzgerald had no idea, but he's getting suspended 2 weeks anyway, and no one else is facing any consequences. Presumably, if there was hazing, someone was involved. That's how that works, and no one's facing any consequences. Immediately, my reaction was, okay, there's way more going on here that we're not hearing about.
Yeah, and to me, it felt like suspending Pat Fitzgerald for 2 weeks in the 2 week window, essentially when all college football coaches are on vacation, like that. This is the time when they're all, in their respective beaches and lakes and wherever they're going to be before their conference media days line up. So suspending him for these 2 weeks, it just felt like a public slap on the wrist in that, you're in trouble, but not so much trouble that anybody's going to be impacted by it other than maybe the PR that you are now, so your name is now associated with being suspended. So my thought went immediately to, well, this is not just a Friday news dump, but you're suspending somebody when they're going to be on vacation anyway. And also just the odd admission that something has happened, but like you said, nobody else is in trouble for it. This investigation happens. We found some wrongdoings. We found that Pat Fitzgerald wasn't responsible for the wrongdoings, but he should have been aware of them. So yes, he's suspended. And so who are the ones doing the wrongdoing then? And what is the situation with those people? And is that something that gets left up to the coaches when the head coach, when he's no longer suspended for something he didn't even realize was going on, in theory, allegedly?
Yeah, that just never made a lot of sense to me. And, the initial report was kind of vague, and Northwestern is a private institution, so they're not subject to the Freedom of Information Act request, so you can't FOIA the full report. They would have to choose to release the full report, and they were not really going to do that. It was all kind of vague, and it was, there was hazing kind of activities and inappropriate activities, and that was it. And then came the bombshell. And that was from the Daily Northwestern, which is the student newspaper at Northwestern. Northwestern has been long famed for having a very good school of journalism, the Medill School of Journalism. And this month, the student reporters there lived up to that reputation. A really, really well put together report, providing a lot of detail on what went on. And again, we're not going to go into a ton of it, but this was not just, the Major League team, the Major League Baseball team that makes their rookies all dress up like superheroes on one flight during the course of the season. This went way, way, way past that. And, once you started reading the allegations in there, and there's, stuff where guys you have to do stuff naked, and there's punishment stuff they have to do, and it's all, way outside what the typical bounds of what a football team or a team atmosphere is supposed to be. That was the moment that I kind of went, okay, so this is going to be a way, way, way bigger story than it even was sort of promising to be after the initial report.
Yeah, because when somebody says hazing, I think we all have a different idea or a different scale of what, because hazing can mean many different things. It can mean, NFL rookies having to sing their fight songs. That's a little form of hazing. That's something that, is something that isn't, I don't know if that's necessarily a punishment. It's just almost tradition at this point. But then you've got, as you ramp it up, the other forms of hazing, and I've never really understood, like, what kind of bonding does hazing do? To me, it's always just been something that I've had to do this, and now I'm angry about having to do it. So now I want somebody else to have to do it because I did it. There's never this, it's a culture of continuing this pain. It's like, I would want to be part of the culture that stops it. Like, we're not doing this anymore. What have we gotten out of it? Basically, it would be like, what bonding have we done when we're all bonding through misery and things like that? And so you start to hear some of the reports of what this is. And then also the reports that, obviously Pat Fitzgerald has denied all of this, but then reports that he would, basically signal players that, hey, you might want to haze this guy during practice or something like that with an overhand clap. And to me, I'm trying to figure out a way, or just how could this not be something that Pat Fitzgerald is doing on purpose, and how can he still remain not knowing? And I can see this just being something he does during practice. Like Mickey Marotti does some clapping, or coaches do clapping, and it becomes something that the players will ape. They will, mimic, and then they maybe incorporate it into their hazing. And I'm thinking maybe it could be something like that, some plausible deniability, or just something that they incorporate it in the hazing, and that's trying to give him the benefit of every doubt. And the more that goes on and the more that comes out, you realize, yeah, you might be stretching the benefit of that doubt, because at some point you don't tolerate hazing at any at any point in your program. Yet there continues to come stories of not just recent, but back in the past as well.
Yeah, and I think you sort of get the subsection of people who want to tell you that, hazing's no big deal and this has happened forever. I don't remember if I've ever actually talked about this on one of these shows before, but I coach a middle school softball team and was just going through all of the prep work for the upcoming school year, because you have to get certified and all this stuff, and part of the training is anti-hazing training, and there's very specific rules that you have to, and this is as a middle school softball coach. So I'm sure Northwestern University probably has a policy that Pat Fitzgerald, almost called him Brett Bielema there, Pat Fitzgerald had to go through and, sign off on and take the training and all that kind of stuff. And, there's a bunch of stuff in there, and it's got negative mental health consequences and all that kind of stuff. And, even the rather, tame stuff is technically against the rules. The stuff that's kind of the far edge, edge case scenarios, like what we're talking about here and what you've heard, in some other, in a few other cases, that's like way, way, way beyond the pale. And I think, there was that pushback from Northwestern where the quote unquote entire Northwestern football team released basically an open letter calling the allegations, quote, exaggerated and twisted, and quote, fabrications, saying that Pat Fitzgerald was not involved in anything and had no knowledge of the allegations until the investigation. Tony, we have been around college football programs. What to you is the likelihood, he asked leadingly, that a head football coach was unaware of something happening on an ongoing basis over the span of a decade or more inside the facility? This is not happening like inside someone's private apartment. This is inside the football facility, without the head coach knowing assuming he's not doing like the Sergeant Schultz, like I know nothing, like intentionally, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil kind of thing. Assuming you are willing to be aware of something, what are the odds that a head coach is unaware of something happening over that kind of span involving this many players over, all in the facility?
Yeah, and it's key that you mentioned the willingness to be aware, because I did see in one of those stories and reports that Pat Fitzgerald doesn't like to go in the locker room because that's the players' area. And to me, if you're avoiding the locker room, it's because you know what's going on in there. There's some of that where I need to maintain my plausible deniability. I need to be able to be clean with that and say, well, I don't even go in there, so how can I know what's going on in there? And so there's some steps that have been taken to maybe try to keep himself clean. But yeah, you've been there that long. That you're telling me that no player, if this is happening to them, maybe they've never complained to a coach. And I just find that unlikely, because all of these coaches do like exit interviews with their players. How was your time here? And coaches also talk with, players talk with their position coaches, players talk with counselors, whoever that is there. So I guess we are to believe that no player has ever complained, and they've waited until after they're done to complain. And honestly, I'm sure a lot of players didn't complain because there's going to be pushback, and it's hard for me to believe that nobody would bring some stuff up during their playing days, even though there is pressure not to do that. But I just, for a guy who has been around that program since like 1993-ish or so, 92. So it's really hard for me to believe that he is blind to all of this, especially with the way security is now. I'm sure there are cameras just about everywhere in the building, and if you want to know what's going on, you can find out. And if you don't want to know what's going on, it's because you don't want to find out.
Yeah, and one thing that's been sort of interesting about this story is the sort of back and forth nature of it, where there's the initial report, and then there's the Daily Northwestern report, and alleging much more serious stuff, and then there's the players come out with that statement defending Fitzgerald and saying it's all sort of exaggerated, and then none of this stuff happened, and then the player sends a photo to ESPN, which ESPN has not published yet, which is kind of weird, but it apparently showed a bunch of the terminology that this guy listed in terms of sort of the punishment things and the hazing exercises that happened, written out on a marker board in the middle of the locker room. And then there's another report after that the initial player who came out said he was going to do basically whatever he could to get Pat Fitzgerald fired, even if it meant twisting the truth. And it's just kind of back and forth, but it does feel like we sort of have a sense for which way the wind's blowing. On Monday afternoon, there was a report that came out in more detail, players going back into the 2000s, alleging, racially tinged treatment for players, and minority players treated differently, and some not real great, pretty ugly comments made towards players of African American and Hispanic descent. And, certain players were made to cut their hair because it wasn't the Wildcat way to have dreadlocks. And, now the university president has come out and said he, quote, may have erred in the severity of the suspension. I don't, Tony, get the sense that he feels he was too harsh. So it feels like right now we're probably waiting to find out if this is like a real long extended suspension or the end of the Pat Fitzgerald era at Northwestern. And I think, to me, the thing that more than anything makes me think I don't know how he can continue is when you are on the road recruiting and you're talking to the parents of players, you are going to have parents who are letting go of their kids to go, they have been living at your house your whole life, and now they're going to go be living at a college, and someone else is going to be sort of the adult in charge. And, how are you going to keep my kids safe? And boy, you read some of the stuff that's come out over the last few days, and I don't know that that's a question he can really answer real well, and that's going to have real negative impacts on the football team, let alone all the other stuff that, all the other reasons that he might not be Northwestern's coach in a week or two.
Yeah, and I don't know if the internet has caused us to our first immediate reaction is somebody needs to be fired. Like that's the only punishment is to be fired. And yet I keep going back to the fact that being a head coach in college football is a privilege. It's not a right. And if you have not performed this in a just and good manner, then doesn't matter how long you've been there, what kind of wins you've had, what kind of, career you've put there. At some point, if harm is coming to people and you are responsible for it or indirectly responsible for it, then why do you need to keep this job? Why can't somebody else do it who is going to keep players and people safe? And you look at what he's done in his time there, and you've had so many people say, they're disputing these claims. The investigation found the claims valid, and so it becomes a difficult thing where obviously 2 weeks is probably going to be increased, and it may be increased to forever. But if there isn't a firing, and I'm not saying he should be fired. What I'm saying is, if you don't fire him, what you're saying is, we believe these allegations. We just think they're not, we're sorry this happened to you, but we'd rather just keep our coach. And if it happens to somebody else, then we may revisit it. But you're diminishing kind of certainly what has happened to people, and not just in the last year, but in 2009 and the years prior, where you're kind of setting a scale for what is bad enough to be fired and what isn't. And when you're saying, yeah, we're going to stick with like a 1 game suspension or whatever, you're telling those people, we're sorry that happened to you, but is it really that bad? Are things really that bad? And I've never understood the need to haze and the benefit of it. And for anybody listening saying, that people just need to get over it, and it made me tougher. What did it do that it made you better? Could you have done without it? I guess is what I'm saying. Could you have done all of these crazy things and disturbing things that you were forced to do? Could you have succeeded without doing that? I bet the answer is yes. And so it feels like the trajectory is that Pat Fitzgerald is not long for Northwestern. Especially each day that passes, something new comes out, and it continues. And I'm not going to say one is worse than the other. It just continues to be all bad.
Yeah, it's that sort of drip, drip, drip that, I think you have that initial report, and it's like, oh boy, this is really bad. And then you have the counter from the quote unquote entire Northwestern team, and then there's a response to the response, and that's when it's okay. This is not just going to go away on its own. And I do think, right or wrong, a lot of this is going to come down to, can you go into a living room and tell a parent that you can take care of their kid, and that you will take care of their kid, and they can trust you to take care of their kid? Because guess what? We are not the only people who have seen these reports. Everyone in the college football, I assure you, everyone who just signed with Northwestern has seen these reports. Everyone who is committed to Northwestern for future classes or in conversation with Northwestern for future classes has seen this report and this whole series of reports, and it just feels like this is something that is going to be a difficult thing for Pat Fitzgerald individually, and then really the program on the whole, institutionally, to sort of overcome in the short to medium term. So, yeah, this is going to be this is potentially a really, really significant thing. And then, guess what? I think we're going to be talking to a whole bunch of Big Ten coaches in a couple weeks about, are you aware of any of this happening in your program? What do you have in place to keep this from happening in your program? Because Northwestern is not necessarily the place where you would have immediately assumed. Northwestern is not the most extreme meathead jock school out there. They are not necessarily the place you would have, assumed that this was going to happen. You would have put this much more likely at a place. I know I'm not going to, throw out a specific school, but let's say one of the more meat-headed schools in the Pac-12. You can fill in the blank there, as opposed to like Stanford. You would not assume that Stanford is where this is happening, and Northwestern kind of the Stanford of the Big Ten. So if it's happening at Northwestern, where else is it happening? That is going to be a fascinating thread to start pulling on in a couple weeks at Big Ten Media Days and elsewhere.
Yeah, and I as we're talking about this and as we were planning, thinking about the show, I do wonder how many programs could withstand this kind of investigation, and really, I'm sure stuff would be found everywhere, but then you get back to levels of, well, yeah, we made somebody do this or people do this. And it's like, well, that's not as bad as this. But I just think, I don't know that anybody is completely clean when it comes to just having hazing tradition. It's just a matter of how far do you go with it and how quickly do you nip it in the bud if it starts to escalate beyond what is acceptable.
Well, this will, I'm sure, be a continually developing story when it comes to Northwestern. It will probably be a continually developing story when it comes to a lot of programs across the country and across the Big Ten. So I'm going to guess this will not be the last time we'll be talking about this stuff in some form or fashion here, but definitely feels like in a very consequential and a time of a tremendous change and really groundswells of change across the sport of college football. This feels like this could be one more thing that ends up bringing about some pretty consequential changes one way or another. So I wanted to at least kind of get that all on the record up front, and then we'll see where all this goes in the coming days and weeks and months. So that will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.